Welcome to Going Underground. I'm Afshin Rattansi. In today's show, as Syriza's victory rocks Europe, what does it mean for Britain's anti-austerity, trade unionist and socialist coalition? The Business Innovation and Skills Select Committee is today quizzing Trade and Investment Minister Lord Livingston about TTIP. Critics of the proposed transatlantic trade partnership fear it could lead to greater austerity and soaring poverty among the 99%. Standing against the main parties in May's general election will be the Trade Unionist and Socialist coalition, which opposes austerity, privatisation and government cuts. The TUSC held their conference on Saturday, and joining me now is their national election agent, Clive Heemskerk. Welcome, Clive, to Going Underground. I suppose we have to ask first about Syriza as TUSC is, would you say, is the Syriza equivalent here in Britain?
We hope to be, absolutely. I mean, it is an incredible result, bigger than expectations, and I think it shows that people will rise against austerity. There is an alternative. You don't have to accept the free market mechanisms. You don't have to accept the tax and living standards that have taken place. And we think that's a positive message, which we hope will have an impact in Britain.
And yet it's still, I mean, it is neck and neck, but people not so easily able to abandon the Labour Party, I suppose the pendant pair to PASOK in Greece. People aren't abandoning Labour at the speed you want.
Well, that's interesting, because Syriza, before the recession broke, was only polling at 3.5%, which is probably very similar to the type of figures which TUSC candidates have been getting in local elections in the 4 years since we've been founded. But the Labour equivalent, PASOK, was polling at 45%, which Labour hasn't reached in Britain for, I don't know how many elections, 3 or 4 elections now. So there is the possibility of a tipping point. This election, I think, will see whichever party wins, whether it's Labour or the Conservatives, recording the lowest ever support amongst the population as a whole, not just those who voted, but the population as a whole. I think we are seeing a situation in politics where people are looking for an answer. This is the 6th year of the longest recession since the 1930s. There's no answer being offered by the establishment parties. We need an alternative.
Not officially a recession, of course, because as Mr. Cameron always reminds us, we're in growth. Well, tell me about.
You asked that. I mean, you tell that to people in my council estate and so on, it's a recession in terms of people's experience, living standards, the attack on public services and so on.
Well, tell me about how that democratic landscape, as far as the polls go, provided a context for your conference on Saturday.
Well, we are going to launch, or we launched at the conference on Saturday, the biggest left of Labour, working class, anti-austerity alternative since the Second World War. There'll be 100 TUSC candidates on the ballot paper in the general election, and also on the same day there's local elections taking place in 279 councils across England, and we will stand 1,000 local council candidates in those elections as well. And by the way, as an aside, the conference discussed our general election platform, but we also discussed our local council platform as well, because we think the media doesn't really take into account the importance of local council services. I'll give you an example if I can, just on the NHS. That, there's a lot of talk about the crisis, and there is a crisis in accident and emergency, but it is recognised that one of the reasons for that is the attack or the cuts in adult social care services. 500,000 fewer elderly people are getting adult social care services from councils in the last 6 years, and it's Labour councils that are implementing those cuts just as much as Tory councils. In fact, it's Labour, Liberal Democrats, Tory, UKIP councillors, and even, I'm afraid, Green councillors who go into the council chamber and vote to implement these cuts, which have a knock-on effect in relation to the NHS. So we are prepared to raise the fact that we are standing both in the local elections, 1,000 candidates, and 100 candidates in the general election.
Well, you mentioned the Greens there. In mainstream narratives, it is pretty much the Greens that are the anti-austerity party. They're opposed to TTIP. What's the difference?
Well, that's very interesting you should say that. In mainstream narrative, that's the problem that we face. The Trade Unionist and Socialist coalition will be, with that number of seats contested, that number of candidates on the ballot paper, we will have the 6th biggest presence on the ballot paper across Britain. We'll have candidates in Wales, England and Scotland. As I say, over 100 parliamentary candidates and 1,000 local council candidates. With the 6th biggest presence on the ballot paper, are we the 6th biggest presence in media coverage? I mean, even Al Murray and the pub landlord has managed to get more publicity than we have. There is a conspiracy of silence. We don't think that there is a fair coverage of the anti-austerity alternative, and we are a clear trade unionist and socialist alternative to austerity.
If there is a media conspiracy, then is that why you're not on the... you haven't been invited to the TV debate?
We haven't indeed, no. Exactly, again, it's...
Even though Plaid, I think David Cameron was saying only this week that Plaid and the SNP should join in the debates.
Yeah, the Broadcasting Authority set this threshold to qualify for a party election broadcast that you have to stand in 1/6 of the seats up for election. We will reach that threshold. So in that sense, we deserve fair media coverage. But we haven't had any idea of an invite. We haven't had any mention...
Do you think voters understand that Labour, Ed Balls is on the record committed to the 1% pay cut for public sector workers? And Natalie Bennett, in an article you wrote, head of the Green Party, saying, well, in the end, we have to vote for the cuts.
Precisely, exactly. That's the dividing line, really. And that's why I would stress both the general election platform and the local council election platform. We do have councillors, and you know, it's not that many. We have a few councillors, 2 in Southampton, 2 in Leicester, Hull councillors, Warrington, Walsall, and so on. And they do not vote for cuts in the council chamber. It's not just that we say we're against cuts. We will not vote for cuts in the council chamber. Unfortunately, the Greens are in Brighton, where they a leading force on the council, have implemented cuts. In Bristol, they've participated in a coalition there implementing cuts. It's not just talking the talk, it's walking the walk, and we are absolutely determined not to allow the austerity agenda to be passed on to...
OK, at this stage, 6th is obviously not anywhere near Syriza's dizzying heights. Do you think mass strike action can, in these intervening periods, as it were, before your party grows bigger, can be some kind of replacement there? Because we are starting to see strike action in the NHS, in public services, on a bigger and bigger scale.
Yeah, for the general election and local elections in May, I'm not sure the mood is going to change dramatically. We're not anticipating the mass surge, but you can never tell. But it is a fact. I think you're right about how really the trade unions have thrown away, the trade union leaders have thrown away an opportunity to change politics in Britain, because I go back to the March 2011, there was 750,000 people on the TUC's March Against Austerity at that point 3 years ago, the biggest trade union demonstration in British history. 6 weeks later, UKIP organised a pro-cuts rally for cuts. Where are the cuts? Nigel Farage spoke at it, they got 300 people. If the trade unions had followed that up with a strike action to defend public sector pensions, if they'd followed it up politically and finally realised that they're not wanted by Labour and they don't need Labour, they should take their own political steps, I think the political climate today would be completely different, and we wouldn't have seen the UKIP bubble develop to the extent that it has.
But of course that's the problem, isn't it? Trade unions are notoriously conservative. Do you think that that's why you were talking a bit about how militant, for instance, in the 1980s was so important? Because trade unions are going to be conservative. They are allied in the main, apart from certain unions like the RMT, not with you. They're allied with the old forces of Labour.
Well, you see, I think things are changing on that front as well. First of all, if you look at the number of trade unions now who are seriously debating what their political strategy is, it's growing all the time. It's not just the RMT, which for its last 3 conferences has passed resolutions affiliating and getting representation inside the Trade Unions and Socialist Coalition. There's other unions, the Prison Officers Association also discussing that, the Civil Servants Union. And actually, for example, in this election, so far, we've got a target of 100 candidates, we've got 51 declared and in place. Of those, we've got 1 in 7 are members of the RMT, 2 of them are members of the National Union of Teachers National Executive Committee, so already there's more NUT National Executive Committee members standing for TUSC than there is for Labour or the Greens or any other party. Unison, we've got 2 members of the National Union.
Well, all is happening there. Just a quick reminder, though, how anyone who is criticising you for saying you're splitting the vote, splitting the left, splitting the anti-Tory vote, your electoral strategy is trying to minimise that.
When you said the left, who do you mean?
Well, the mainstream would say the left. Are you?
Precisely.
But are you going to go against, say, in a constituency where you think the Greens might win? Will you be helping to split that vote and allow the Tory or the Labour candidate in?
TUSC campaigns. The reason we've got 51 candidates in place, but we expect to get well over 100 on the ballot paper in the parliamentary elections, is that we've gone through a process of lobbying Labour MPs in particular with our basic demands against austerity, for the repeal of the anti-trade union laws, for a living wage of £10 an hour, and to give them their due, a tiny handful, have actually said, yes, we do support this, and we will go into Parliament and we will fight for that. People like John McDonnell, for example, in West London, and therefore there won't be TUSC candidates in those seats. But if Labour candidates talk a talk but don't actually deliver, and are not even prepared to sign up to basic things like it's now TUC policy, £10 an hour minimum wage is TUC Trade Union Congress policy. If Labour MPs are not prepared to sign up for that, well, then we'll stand against them because we need to give them a kick.
Clive Heemskerk, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
That's it for today, but join us again on Saturday. In the meantime, you can connect to us via Twitter, Facebook, SoundCloud and email. And don't forget RT UK News with Bill Dodd every weekday evening on the hour from 6 till 10. See you on Saturday.